The military wanted us silent, but in the dark, our love still spoke. They told us war was hell, but nothing burns more than hiding who you are in the place you swore to defend. I didn't lose my mind in Afghanistan, I lost it every time I had to pretend I didn't love him. Fort Polk, Louisiana, 2010. The air inside the barracks was thick with sweat, gun oil, and secrets. Private First Class Elijah Hart sat on the bottom bunk, lacing his boots with the precision only fear could teach. The others had gone out to smoke, haze the new guys, or find trouble in town. For 5 minutes, maybe 10, he had silence. Until the door creaked. Sergeant Caleb Monroe stepped in, carrying the storm with him. Drenched in rain, camo soaked, jaw clenched like a bear trap. But it wasn't the weather that made Elijah's chest tighten. It was the way Caleb looked at him, like he was both a crime and a salvation. "We need to talk," Caleb said, his voice low and dangerous. Elijah didn't look up. "They saw us." Caleb didn't answer. Instead, he locked the door behind him. That said enough. Elijah stood slowly, every joint in his body screaming tension. "Which one?" "Staff Sergeant Keller. He saw us on the range last night. After lights out." "Jesus," Elijah whispered, the air sucked from his lungs. "We're done." "No," Caleb snapped. "Not yet. We still have time." But they both knew how it worked. "Don't ask, don't tell" wasn't protection, it was a loaded gun pointed at your back, ready to go off if you even looked the wrong way. If Keller had seen the kiss, the touch, the silence between them charged like static before lightning, then it was only a matter of time. "You should say it was me," Elijah said, finally meeting Caleb's eyes. "That I came on to you. You pushed me away. That's how they'll believe it." Caleb looked like Elijah had hit him. "I'm not selling you out. Not again. Not again." The first time had been in Kandahar. 3 years ago. A quiet night, an empty watchtower, a kiss that still lived in Elijah's bones. Then Caleb pulled away hard, pretending it was a mistake. A drunken moment. He'd ghosted Elijah for months, and when they reunited stateside, it was as if none of it happened. But it had happened. And it never stopped. "I can take it," Elijah said, quieter now. "If it means you get to keep your stripes." "You think this is about stripes?" Caleb growled. He stepped closer, close enough Elijah could feel the heat coming off his skin. "I lied to myself once. Said I could pretend, be the soldier they wanted, the man my father wanted. But I couldn't. And now I don't care what they do to me. I'm not letting them erase you." A silence stretched. The kind that tasted like hope, but always came right before heartbreak. "Then, so what now?" Elijah asked. Caleb's jaw worked like he was chewing down regret. "We survive. Quietly. Carefully. Just a little longer. My deployment ends in 6 months. Then I'm done. We can get out together. Start over." Elijah stared at him. "You're serious?" Caleb nodded once. "I love you, Eli." It was the first time he'd said it. Out loud. Without shadows to hide in. And like fools, they believed it would be enough. It lasted 5 days. 5 days of stolen glances in the mess hall, of brushing hands during rifle drills, of holding their breath anytime someone stared too long. On the 6th day, Keller made his move. It started with a locker inspection. Then a surprise drug test. Then rumors. Ugly ones. And worst of all, Keller never came at them directly. He let the suspicion grow, rot, infect the unit like a sickness. By the 2nd week, Elijah found a note shoved under his pillow. Just 4 words. "We know. You're dead." That night, someone pissed in his boots. Ripped his name tag off his gear. Drew slurs on his wall locker with permanent marker. He didn't tell Caleb. Not yet. Instead, Elijah buried the rage. Like he'd been trained to. Like every other gay soldier had done since the first man lied about who he was to serve this country. But rage has a way of festering. 3 weeks later, a training exercise in the woods turned ugly. Keller volunteered to lead it. Of course he did. He split the squad into pairs, Elijah and Keller together. Caleb assigned with 2 of the privates. "Stay sharp," Keller said, handing Elijah a map and compass. "You get lost, no one's coming for you." They trekked deep into the forest, further than the others. Keller talked the whole way about patriotism, weakness, sin. Every word a dagger wrapped in a flag. When they reached the ridge, Keller stopped. Turned. "You ever wonder," he said, "what it'd be like if you just disappeared out here? These woods are full of holes. Old mines. Gators. No one'd ever find you." Elijah didn't blink. "You planning to kill me, Staff Sergeant?" Keller smiled. "No. But I wouldn't shed a tear if something happened." He stepped forward too close. "You think that sergeant of yours can save you? You're a faggot. And faggots don't belong in my army." Elijah's fist connected with Keller's jaw before he even knew he'd swung. It was a blur after that: fists, blood, gravel, mud. Keller was strong, but Elijah was fueled by every bruise, every lie, every night spent praying he'd wake up straight. When the others found them, Keller was on the ground, nose broken, face purple. Elijah stood over him, breathing like a wounded animal, fists shaking. Caleb didn't say a word. He just stepped between Elijah and the others and said, "This never happened." But it had. And the cost was coming. Elijah sat in the CO's office the next morning, blood crusted on his knuckles, eyes locked forward like a prisoner waiting for sentence. Across from him, Captain Morgan flipped through a thin manila folder with an expression carved from stone. The silence buzzed like power lines. Finally, the captain spoke. "You attacked a superior officer during a training exercise." "I defended myself," Elijah said. Calm. Controlled. Like they'd taught him. "There are no witnesses." "I was provoked." Morgan looked up, eyebrows lifting. "By what?" Elijah hesitated. The weight of the truth pressed at his throat like a hand. "Say it, and everything burns. Stay silent, and Keller wins." He glanced at the corner, where Caleb stood at parade rest, eyes forward, unreadable. Captain Morgan sighed. "Look, Hart. You're a good soldier. Your record's clean. You scored high in field navigation, sharpshooting, and survival." A pause. "But you don't belong here anymore." There it was. Not a court-martial. Not even a trial. Just the slow erasure of a man. They called it an administrative separation. No honorable discharge. No VA benefits. No appeals. Just gone. The final blow came later, when Caleb met him behind the barracks under the sodium yellow glow of a flickering security light. "I'm sorry," Caleb said, hands shoved into his jacket like he was afraid they'd betray him. "I don't blame you," Elijah replied. "Yes, you do. And you should." Elijah leaned against the concrete wall, exhaustion sinking into his bones. "What happens now?" "I'll make noise. File complaints. Call out Keller." "They'll bury it," Elijah said flatly. "You know they will." Caleb looked at him, eyes raw. "Then I'll go with you. We'll leave this behind. We'll start over." "No," Elijah said. "You need to finish your time. Get your pension. Get out clean." "I don't want clean if it means losing you." Elijah smiled, but there was no joy in it. You already did. Then he turned and walked into the night, duffel bag in hand, knowing Caleb wouldn't follow. Not yet. San Diego, 6 months later. Elijah poured coffee behind the counter of a downtown diner, the kind that stayed open all night and smelled like burned toast and broken dreams. He didn't talk much. Didn't smile much either. The uniform was gone, but the posture remained straight spine, eyes always scanning. Most nights, the only sounds were clinking forks, old rock songs on the jukebox, and the waitress Marcy cursing under her breath about her ex-husband. It was fine. Quiet. Safe. Until the night Caleb walked in. Elijah almost dropped the carafe. He hadn't seen that face in 6 months, the way the jaw still clenched when nervous, the eyes that scanned a room before settling on him like a spotlight. Caleb slid into a booth and waited. Elijah didn't move. Marcy nudged him. "Hey, war hero. That handsome guy's staring like you owe him your soul." "I probably do," Elijah muttered. He walked over, set down a menu. "You got about 2 minutes before I pretend I don't know you." Caleb didn't open the menu. "I finished my last tour. Separated last week. No ceremony. Just a box and a handshake." Elijah said nothing. "I looked for you. VA wouldn't give me anything. Had to call your mom." "You talked to my mother?" "She hung up on me," Caleb said, almost smiling. "Then texted your address an hour later." Elijah looked down. "You shouldn't be here. I came to say I was wrong." "That's a long drive for regret." "I don't regret you," Caleb said. "I regret waiting." Elijah turned to leave. "I went public, Eli," Caleb said quickly. "After you were discharged. I told the press what Keller did. Named names. I even gave an interview with the Advocate. Said your name out loud on camera." Elijah froze. "You did what?" "I lost my clearance. Got hate mail. My dad stopped talking to me. But I'd do it again." Silence stretched. Then Elijah sat down across from him. Slowly. Carefully. "I thought you'd forget me." "I tried," Caleb said, voice cracking. "Didn't work." They sat like that for a long time, the clink of silverware and hum of a broken jukebox playing in the background. Finally, Elijah whispered, "You want coffee?" Caleb smiled. "Only if you sit with me." They moved in together 2 months later. A small one-bedroom apartment in Hillcrest, near Balboa Park. Too many stairs, bad plumbing, but it was theirs. At night, Caleb would wake from dreams of IEDs and screaming radios, and Elijah would press a hand to his chest until he calmed. Elijah still didn't talk much, but when he did, it was with softness Caleb had never earned. They were building something. It wasn't perfect. But it was real. Until the letter came. Caleb sat on the couch, mail scattered across his lap. He didn't see the envelope at first. It was plain. Government issued. No return address. Inside was a summons. Testimony request. Senate hearings on LGBTQ rights in the military. Specifically, survivors of Don't Ask, Don't Tell. They wanted Caleb to speak. "I can't," he told Elijah that night. "I'm just one guy. They'll crucify me." Elijah held the letter like it was radioactive. "You told the truth once. You can do it again." Caleb shook his head. "That was local news. This is national. The whole country watching. YouTube. Facebook. My face. My name. You don't have to do it for them," Elijah said gently. "Do it for every kid hiding in the barracks. For every soldier who kissed someone they loved and woke up in chains. A beat. For me." Caleb swallowed. I'm scared. I know, Elijah said, kissing his forehead. So am I. But we didn't survive this just to stay silent. The hearing room was packed. Cameras lined the walls. Reporters. Activists. Protesters outside with signs that read God hates sin and let them love. Caleb sat at the table, hands folded, suit tight around his shoulders. Elijah sat in the back row, wearing a pin with the army insignia and a rainbow ribbon. The senator leaned forward. Sergeant Monroe. You stated in your affidavit that you witnessed targeted harassment and misconduct tied directly to your sexual orientation while serving. Do you stand by that? Caleb looked down, then up. Yes, sir. I do. The senator nodded. And do you believe the current military system protects LGBTQ personnel? No, Caleb said. I believe it protects the idea of tolerance. Not the people. Murmurs rippled. Another senator frowned. You're aware that revealing this publicly could impact your future employment, security clearance, and standing in veteran communities? I am. And yet, you're still here. Caleb turned. Found Elijah's face in the crowd. And smiled. I'm here because silence nearly killed the man I love. I won't let it kill the next one. After the hearing, the internet exploded. Articles. Headlines. Hashtags. Still we serve. Love in uniform. Elijah and Caleb. Some called them heroes. Others called them traitors. But they weren't alone anymore. Messages poured in from all over the country. Young soldiers. Retired veterans. Even a few old generals, quietly thanking them for saying what they never could. They were invited to speak at universities. LGBTQ centers. Veteran groups. Some days were hard flashbacks, threats, the echo of boots in nightmares, but they had each other. They held hands at Pride, wore their dog tags on matching chains, and kissed under fireworks on the 4th of July. One day, Caleb asked. And Elijah said yes. The wedding wasn't grand. No cathedral, no aisles lined with flowers. Just a sunlit clearing in the woods behind a friend's cabin in Northern California, the first place they'd ever kissed without fear. They stood beneath a crooked arch made from driftwood and branches, dressed in matching navy suits, hands trembling in each other's. There were no parents in the front row. No childhood best friends from home. Just a ragtag group of veterans, activists, and strangers who'd become family. The people who understood that love, when buried, grows wild and strong in the dark. Elijah's voice cracked when he said, I do. Caleb didn't even try to hide the tears when he repeated it back. Afterward, when everyone else was dancing or drinking cheap champagne from red Solo cups, Elijah pulled Caleb away to the edge of the tree line. This is it, huh? Elijah whispered, brushing his fingers over Caleb's jaw. We made it. Caleb laughed, forehead pressed against his. Feels like we survived a war just to love each other. Elijah kissed him. Soft. Slow. Full of everything they had carried for so long. But peace, they both knew, was never permanent. The first hate letter came 2 weeks later. Handwritten. Angry. Bible quotes scrawled in red ink across the envelope. Inside, a photo of them at their wedding, printed from the internet, torn down the middle. The second came with no return address and smelled faintly of gasoline. Then someone slashed their tires. Left a note on their windshield that read. You think you're safe because you wear suits now? It would have been easy to run. Again. But Elijah was done running. He'd run from his father, his pastor, his commanding officer. From himself. Not anymore. So they stayed. They filed police reports, changed locks, joined local LGBTQ security networks. Caleb installed cameras. Elijah bought a baseball bat and slept with it under the bed. And in between the threats, the world still moved. A news segment aired about them. A journalist wrote a feature called, "Brothers in Arms, Husbands in Life." Their faces lit up across newsstands and homepages, sparking a national conversation about love and service and what America really asked of its soldiers. One night, while Caleb was brushing his teeth, Elijah stood in the hallway, staring at the framed flag on their wall. The one folded at his grandfather's funeral. The one he used to believe stood for people like him. "Do you still believe in it?" he asked quietly. "In what?" Caleb called from the bathroom. "In the country. The flag. All of it." Caleb leaned into the doorway, toothbrush in hand. "I believe in the people who fight to make it mean something. Like you." Elijah smiled faintly. "That's a hell of a lot to carry. Good thing we're trained for heavy loads." They both laughed. It wasn't a perfect answer. But it was honest. A year passed. Then came the letter that changed everything again. This time, it wasn't hate. It was hope. It came from Washington. A bill had been introduced, one that would provide full retroactive benefits to LGBTQ service members discharged under Don't Ask, Don't Tell. And the committee wanted Elijah to testify this time. His name. His story. On the record. He read the letter twice. Then a third time. Caleb walked in to find him frozen on the couch. "You okay?" "They want me," Elijah whispered. "Not you. Me." "Of course they do," Caleb said. "You're the reason I spoke up. You're the reason I'm still standing." Elijah swallowed. "I don't know if I'm ready." Caleb sat beside him. "That day in the woods, when you stood up to Keller. I knew then. You were braver than I'd ever be. I was scared out of my mind." "Courage isn't about not being scared," Caleb said. "It's about choosing to act anyway." Elijah took a deep breath. Then he nodded. "I'll do it." This time, the chamber was even fuller. Cameras. Flashbulbs. Lawmakers. Veterans in dress blues. Protesters outside, waving signs, some in support, some spewing hate. Elijah adjusted the mic in front of him, heart thudding in his throat. He wore a simple black suit. No medals. No rank insignia. Just a rainbow pin on his lapel and a thin chain around his neck, Caleb's dog tag and his own, clinking softly like ghosts. A senator asked, "Private First Class Hart, can you describe the circumstances of your discharge?" Elijah cleared his throat. "I kissed the man I loved." A ripple went through the room. "I didn't break any laws. I didn't hurt anyone. I wasn't impaired or unfit. I was a good soldier. And I kissed him, and for that, I lost everything." The senator blinked. "And do you believe this legislation will help rectify that loss?" "No law can give me back what the military took. Not just my career. My dignity. My trust. My belief in justice." A pause. "But maybe it can give the next kid a chance to not be erased." The chamber fell into silence. And then, applause. Not from everyone. But enough. 3 months later, the bill passed. Narrowly. Contentiously. But it passed. Retroactive benefits were restored. Honorable discharges reissued. Official apologies sent. Records corrected. The history books rewritten, just a little. Elijah got a letter. So did thousands like him. It read simply. "Your service was honorable. We failed to honor it. We apologize." Elijah held the letter for a long time. Then burned it. Not out of spite. but because he didn't need their words anymore. He had his own. They started speaking publicly. Not just in Washington, but across the country. High schools. Colleges. Army bases. Elijah stood before rooms filled with teenagers and young soldiers, and told the truth. About fear. About shame. About resilience. Caleb would sometimes watch from the back, quiet and proud, arms crossed over his chest like he was guarding something sacred. One day, after a speech at a Virginia base, a young recruit approached Elijah, eyes wide and voice shaking. "Sir. I'm gay. And I'm terrified. My dad's a colonel. My roommate thinks I'm straight. Sometimes I think about just leaving." Elijah looked at the kid, couldn't have been more than 19, and placed a hand on his shoulder. "You don't have to fight this alone. You hear me? Not anymore." The kid nodded, eyes wet. And Elijah realized something. They weren't just telling stories. They were lighting fires in the dark. One night, back home, Elijah stood in their kitchen watching Caleb dry dishes. "Do you think," Elijah asked slowly, "we were meant to go through all that? Just to get here?" Caleb looked over his shoulder. "You mean the war, the trauma, the hiding, the hearings?" Elijah smiled. "Yeah. All of it." Caleb set down the towel. Walked over. Took Elijah's hand. "I think we went through all that. Because someone had to. And if we hadn't met?" Caleb kissed him. Soft. Certain. "We did." They stood like that for a while. In silence. In peace. In love that had survived the battlefield, the courtroom, the whispers, the threats. In love that refused to die in the dark. 3 years later. Fort Hood, Texas. The air was thick with summer heat and humidity, but the memorial hall was quiet, reverent. Rows of uniforms filled the pews: Marines, Navy, Air Force, Army. Brass glinted. Medals clinked softly. And at the front, a simple black and white photo rested on an easel. It was Sergeant Marcus Allen. 27 years old. Honor graduate. Bronze Star recipient. Gay. Found dead in his barracks. Suicide. The letter he left behind was brief. Just 4 lines. "I served my country. But it never served me. I loved a man I could never name. I stood proud, but never safe. I'm tired." When Elijah heard the news, something in him cracked. Not like the sharp break of a bone, more like the slow, tearing rip of fabric long worn too thin. They asked him to speak at the service. At first, he said no. Then Caleb found him standing on the balcony of their apartment at 3 a.m., staring out over the city like he was listening for ghosts. "They need to hear from you," Caleb said softly. Elijah didn't look away. "What do I say? That I survived when he didn't?" "No," Caleb said, stepping beside him. "That you fought. And you're still fighting. So they don't have to die in silence." The chapel was packed. Elijah stood at the podium, hands steady despite the storm behind his ribs. "I didn't know Sergeant Allen personally," he began. "But I know his story. Because it was mine. Because it's still too many." He looked out at the faces, some hard, some soft, some unreadable. "They told us the mission was to serve. To protect. To fight for freedom. But they never told us how to survive once we got home. Or worse, how to survive while hiding who we are within the very walls that claim to protect us." A pause. "When I was discharged, I thought it was the worst day of my life. But now, I realize the worst part wasn't losing the uniform. It was believing I didn't deserve to wear it because of who I loved." More silence. Heavy. Grieving. "I'm still here. Not because I'm stronger. Not because I'm braver. But because someone else, my husband, reminded me I was worthy. That I wasn't alone. He glanced at Caleb in the front row. And to every young soldier out there still hiding, still scared, still praying for the day they can exhale, you are not alone either. Not anymore. Later that day, under the blistering sun, Elijah and Caleb stood by Marcus Allen's grave. Fresh dirt. A folded flag. A small bouquet of white lilies. Elijah placed a hand on the headstone and whispered, "I'm sorry. We should have gotten there sooner." Caleb stood beside him in silence, one hand resting gently on Elijah's back. Then a voice behind them said, "Excuse me." They turned. A woman, mid-50s. Dark blue dress. Red-rimmed eyes. She looked at them, hesitating. "I'm Marcus's mother," she said quietly. "I saw your speech. Thank you." Elijah started to say something, but she raised a hand. "He never told me. About being gay. About anyone. I guess. I think he thought I wouldn't understand." Tears welled up, but she didn't cry. "I don't want to be angry anymore. I just want to make sure no one else ends up like him." Caleb stepped forward. "You won't have to do it alone." She nodded. "I want to help. Speak. Tell people. Fund scholarships. Start something in his name." Elijah took her hand. "We'll do it together." Months passed. Then a year. Elijah and Caleb, along with Marcus's mother Claire, founded the Allen Foundation, a non-profit for LGBTQ military members and veterans. They opened shelters for discharged youth. Provided legal support for discharge upgrades. Lobbied for inclusion in mental health care services. Created safe reporting channels for harassment. They named their flagship program Operation Speak because too many had been forced into silence for too long. And slowly, something began to shift. The military began publishing inclusive training modules. Base commanders hosted LGBTQ awareness events. Pride flags appeared in office corners and chaplain offices. Recruiters started showing up at LGBTQ job fairs. It wasn't perfect. There were still whispers. Still threats. Still lawmakers trying to drag it all backwards. But there was a movement now. A community. A pulse. And the love that once lived only in shadows was speaking in every corner of the country. On the 5th anniversary of Operation Speak, Elijah was invited to the Pentagon. He stood in a high-ceilinged hall of marble and metals, surrounded by generals and civilians, in front of a new monument, the Service Wall of Honor for LGBTQ veterans. Engraved in steel were names once buried in silence and now shining under the seal of the United States. Caleb stood beside him. Their fingers brushed. A reporter approached afterward. "Mr. Hart, did you ever think you'd see this day?" Elijah laughed softly. "I never thought I'd live to see it. But I'm glad I did." "Do you think the military's changed?" He nodded. "Some. Not enough. But the people? The people are ready." "What would you say to the young private who kissed another man behind a locked barracks door and thought it would ruin his life?" Elijah's eyes warmed. "I'd say, he didn't ruin anything. He saved it." That night, Elijah and Caleb returned home to their quiet apartment overlooking the city. They kicked off their shoes, poured 2 glasses of wine, and sat on the floor like they used to in the early days before speeches and laws and monuments. "I keep thinking," Caleb said, "if we'd stayed silent. If we'd just survived and disappeared. Would anyone have remembered us?" Elijah leaned back against him. "No one was ever supposed to remember us. That's the point. We weren't supposed to exist. Not in uniform. Not in love. Not in the open." He looked out the window at the stars. But we did. And now they can't forget. Years later, long after the interview stopped and the noise faded, Elijah stood before a group of young cadets at West Point. He was older now. Gray in his beard. Slower in his walk. But sharp as ever. He held up a photo, an old snapshot of him and Caleb in uniform, barely 25, hiding in a shadowed hallway, their hands just barely touching. This, Elijah said, was once a risk big enough to end a career. The room was quiet. He lowered the photo. But this, he said, was also the beginning of everything that matters. And somewhere, in some dusty barracks, under some dim flickering light, two soldiers leaned in just a little closer. A hand brushed another. A breath caught. And a secret, once heavy with shame, now felt just a little lighter. Because somewhere out there, love had spoken. Loud enough to be heard forever. The end. If you find it interesting, please like and subscribe to follow the next stories.